I think I didn't do anything wrong, just wanted to vent about my husband being insecure. I sent a photo as a joke, something harmless between friends. I didn't expect that one stupid message to end my marriage, or that he'd walk out without a word and return with a lawyer. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. I didn't think I did anything wrong. I just wanted to laugh, to feel seen for once. Mark had become so serious lately, quiet, withdrawn, always tired. When I told my friends that, they said every marriage gets dull after a few years. We were only 5 years in, but he already acted like a man 20 years older. So yes, I made a joke. Maybe I went too far, but that night it didn't feel cruel, it felt funny. It started on a Thursday, after a small argument about nothing, really nothing. He'd left his work boots by the door again, and I told him I was tired of tripping over them. He said I could move them if they bothered me so much. I snapped back that I shouldn't have to clean up after a grown man. He sighed and walked away, like he'd learned not to waste breath on me. That made me angrier than shouting would have. Later, when he went to bed, I stayed up scrolling through my group chat with Adele and Carly. We'd all met through work, and the chat was mostly jokes, gossip, memes, complaints about our partners. Adele sent a picture of her boyfriend snoring with the caption, "Tell me again why I date humans." We all laughed. Then Carly joked that we should start a truth series, photos of our men in real life. Adele went first, sending a silly selfie of her boyfriend mid-yawn. Carly sent a blurry shot of her husband half-dressed in the kitchen. They teased me to share something next. I said, "You really want honesty?" They said, "Always." I thought for a second, then opened my photo gallery. I don't even know what made me choose that one. Maybe the spite from earlier, or maybe the wine. It was a photo from months ago, one I shouldn't have had saved. He'd been changing, and I'd caught him in a teasing mood, joking about how shy he was. I'd laughed and snapped it before he could stop me. He told me to delete it. I didn't. I sent it. Just like that. No warning, no thought. I added a laughing emoji and wrote, "Confidence level. Small but proud." The group exploded in laughter. Adele sent crying emojis. Carly said, "OMG, stop." I felt a rush, a stupid hot thrill that they were laughing with me. It wasn't even about Mark anymore. It was about being the funniest one in the group, the bold one. Adele said I was evil, but in a funny way. Carly said, "Don't let him see this or you'll be sleeping on the couch." I said, "Please, he's too boring to notice." They all sent more laughing emojis. It was stupid. All of it was stupid. But in that moment, it felt harmless. The next morning, Mark was unusually quiet. He made coffee, packed his lunch, kissed our son's head, and said he'd be home late. I didn't think anything of it. I even sent a few more jokes to the chat before leaving for work. When I got to the office, Carly looked strange. She avoided eye contact. I asked if everything was okay. She said, "Yeah, just busy." I shrugged it off. Around noon, Adele messaged privately, "Did you tell him?" I wrote back, "Tell him what?" She sent a screenshot, my photo, cropped but recognizable, followed by, "This got forwarded. Careful." My chest tightened. I asked how. She said she didn't know, but someone must have saved it. Carly, maybe. Or someone she showed. I wanted to throw up. When I got home, the apartment was spotless, unnervingly so. The smell of cleaning spray hung in the air. Mark's shoes were gone from the door. His keys weren't on the hook. For a second, I thought he'd just worked late like he said. Then I noticed my phone on the table. Not in my bag, not charging, just sitting there. The screen was unlocked, the chat open. He must have seen it. The thread was scrolled up to my message. The photo, the caption, the laughing emojis. My throat went dry. I turned toward the hallway just as he appeared. He was calm, his expression unreadable. He looked at the phone, then at me, and said quietly, "So this is what I am now?" I froze. I tried to laugh, to make it sound light. I said it was just a joke, just something stupid girls did to blow off steam. He didn't respond. He picked up his jacket, took his wallet from the counter and said, "I'll be gone for a while." I asked where he was going. He said, "Somewhere I can remember my dignity." Then he left. I stood there for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. My first thought wasn't guilt. It was panic, that he might tell someone, that the story would spread. I sent a message to Adele. He saw. He's furious. She wrote, "He'll calm down. Just cry a little and blame hormones." But that night, he didn't come home. I checked my phone over and over. No call, no text. I even messaged him around midnight saying, "You're being ridiculous." It was a joke. He read it and didn't reply. The next day, Carly cornered me in the office kitchen. She whispered that Mark had called her husband. My stomach dropped. She said he'd asked if the photo had spread outside our group. Her husband had lied, said no, but the panic in her eyes told me she wasn't sure it hadn't. At lunch, Adele texted again, "Girl, you need to fix this before he does something crazy." I said, "Like what?" She said, "Like leave you." I laughed it off but kept checking the door every few minutes, waiting for his message. When I got home, some of his clothes were gone. The closet looked hollow. I told myself he was bluffing, just trying to scare me. He'd come back. He always did after we fought. I poured a drink and rehearsed what I'd say when he did. How I'd twisted into him overreacting. How I'd cry just enough to make him feel guilty for leaving. But as the night dragged on, no key turned in the lock. I called him again, straight to voicemail. Around midnight, I noticed something strange. The framed photo of us from our wedding day, the one on the hallway table, was missing. In its place was a folded piece of paper. I opened it. One sentence in his handwriting. "You turn me into a punchline. Now I'll show you what quiet looks like." My hand shook as I read it again and again. I told myself he was being dramatic, that he'd cool off and come home. But deep down, I felt something colder than fear. The first flicker of understanding that maybe this time he wasn't bluffing. I sat on the couch until sunrise, scrolling through that chat, reading every laughing emoji, every stupid line I'd written, wondering when humor had turned into cruelty, and when I'd stopped knowing the difference. The morning after he left, the apartment felt unnaturally quiet. Even the refrigerator hum seemed louder. I tried to convince myself he was just staying at his parents' place to cool off. I'd done that once before. Locked myself in the guest room after a fight and waited for him to come apologize. He always did. That was our pattern. I pushed too far, he forgave too easily. So I figured this would be the same. I made coffee, scrolled through my phone, and pretended nothing had changed. But every time a message came through, my chest tightened. None were from him. The group chat was buzzing, though. Adele asking what happened, Carly saying Mark had called her husband again. I typed, "He's fine. Overreacting." Then I deleted it. I didn't want to sound defensive. Instead, I wrote, "He needed a break. He's dramatic like that." They sent half-hearted replies. No jokes this time. By noon, I'd called him 5 times. Straight to voicemail. I left one message. The nice kind, not angry. I said I understood why he was upset, but that he was blowing things out of proportion. I told him I didn't mean to humiliate him. I just needed to vent. I even said I'd delete the photo, pretending I hadn't already. At work, everyone acted strange. People lowered their voices when I walked by. Carly wouldn't meet my eyes. Even my manager, who normally ignored gossip, asked if everything was all right at home. I told her yes, just marital miscommunication. She nodded, but her look said she'd heard something. I found out later she had. The photo had circulated beyond the group chat. Someone had screenshotted it and sent it to someone else, then someone else. And then, apparently, someone showed it to one of Mark's co-workers. That evening, I called Adele in a panic. She swore she hadn't sent it anywhere. Carly said she hadn't either. I demanded to know who leaked it. Adele said maybe one of her friends had seen her phone. I said, "You realize what you've done?" She said, "You realize what you did?" I hung up. I spent the rest of the night pacing, waiting for Mark to text, to yell, to say something, anything. I even wanted him to come home angry. That would mean there was still something to fix. But silence is heavier than rage. It just sits on you, pressing harder every hour. The next morning I took Theo to school. He asked why Daddy wasn't home. I told him Daddy was helping Grandma with something. He nodded, trusting me, and ran off to join his friends. My stomach knotted. When I got home, I saw that Mark's phone charger was gone. His toothbrush, too. By afternoon, Lydia called. Her voice was cold, careful. She asked if I had anything to tell her. I said, "About what?" She said, "About why my son's co-workers are calling him names behind his back." My face burned. I said I didn't know what she was talking about. She said she didn't want to believe the rumor, but that she'd seen the photo herself. Someone had sent it to her. I froze. She said, "He didn't deserve that kind of cruelty." I told her it was private, that it wasn't supposed to go anywhere. She said, "Then why did you send it at all?" I said, "Because he made me feel invisible." She said, "And that makes this okay?" Her voice didn't rise, but it cut deep. Before I could respond, she said, "He's staying here now. Don't come by uninvited." Then she hung up. I stared at my phone for a long time. My first instinct wasn't shame. It was fury. Fury that she took his side, that she made me sound like the monster. I texted Adele again. "This is your fault. You leaked it." She didn't respond. Later that evening, I saw Mark had blocked me on every platform. No profile picture, no last scene, no connection. It was as if he'd deleted me. I called again. The number went straight to voicemail. I wrote him an email. Long, emotional, dramatic. I said I missed him, that he was cruel for cutting me off, that everyone makes mistakes. I ended it with, "Please, I can explain if you'd just talk to me." He didn't reply. At work the next day, HR called me in. The manager closed the door gently and said, "There's been a complaint." My heart sank. She said an image had been circulated that could be considered harassment or a privacy violation. She didn't say Mark's name, but I knew. I said it was a misunderstanding between spouses. She said it didn't matter. It had happened on company devices. They gave me a warning, said any further incident would result in suspension. When I got home that night, I poured wine before even taking off my shoes. My reflection in the glass door looked unfamiliar. Tight smile, tired eyes. I tried calling Lydia again. She didn't answer. I tried texting Mark one last time. "You're really going to ruin our life over a stupid joke?" No reply. The next morning, a plain white envelope was taped to the front door. Inside was a printed letter, neatly folded, signed by a lawyer named Rachel West. The words blurred together, but I caught enough to understand. Notice of intent to separate. Pending review of evidence. Custody and financial arrangements to follow. I laughed out loud at first. A hollow, shaky laugh. It sounded ridiculous. A lawyer. Over a joke. But the laughter didn't last long. My hands were trembling too hard to keep reading. I called Adele again, desperate. She said, "He's not bluffing, Iris. He's serious. You should call someone." I said, "Like who?" She said, "A lawyer." I told her I didn't need one, that this was just Mark trying to scare me, but even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Later that day, Theo asked when Daddy was coming home. I told him soon, maybe the weekend. He said, "Daddy said I'll see him on Friday at Grandma's." My stomach turned. That meant they'd already made plans, without me. That night, I sat on the couch staring at the letter until the ink seemed to move. I tried reading it again and again, hoping to find something less final between the lines, but every sentence was crisp, legal, irreversible. The last page had one short line, in small print at the bottom, evidence available upon request. I whispered the word evidence to myself, tasting its threat. Evidence meant copies, proof, witnesses. It meant he wasn't just angry. He was building something. I poured another drink and told myself he was bluffing, that he still loved me too much to follow through. But when I tried to picture his face, the image that came wasn't loving or hurt. It was stillness. That same quiet look he had before he walked out. That was when I realized silence could be louder than shouting. And Mark's silence wasn't retreat. It was strategy. The next few days felt like walking through fog. Nothing made sense, and every sound felt distant. I woke up reaching for my phone, expecting a message from Mark, some signal that he'd calmed down, that maybe he was ready to talk. There was nothing. Just that unread email I'd sent, still sitting there like a bruise I couldn't stop touching. I told myself he wouldn't actually go through with this separation thing. He wasn't that type. Mark hated drama. Whenever I cried, or threw words like divorce into our arguments, he'd always go quiet, let me wear myself out, and then fix things in his quiet way. He was calm, dependable, predictable. That was what made this unbearable. He wasn't being predictable anymore. At work, the gossip had stopped being whispers. People didn't even hide their looks now. I overheard one of the new hires say, "That's her, the one with the photo." The shame was like a fever crawling under my skin. I wanted to scream that it wasn't what they thought, that it was supposed to be private, a stupid mistake, not malicious. But what difference did that make? Once people laugh at something, you can't explain it away. When I walked into the break room, Carly was there with two others. They went quiet. I asked her if she'd told anyone. She said no, but her tone was thin and brittle. I told her I knew someone in the group had leaked it. She said maybe it was me, that maybe I'd said something drunk one night and forgot. The accusation stung, mostly because it didn't sound impossible. That afternoon I went home early. The apartment was still half empty, his closet looking like a wound. I sat on the floor beside it and tried calling again. Straight to voicemail. I sent one more message. "Please, Mark, we can fix this. Just talk to me." Then I waited. Hours later, my phone buzzed, finally. But it wasn't him. It was Lydia. Her voice was sharp, almost trembling. She said, "He's seen a lawyer again. They're going ahead with the paperwork." I said she had no right to interfere. She said, "You should start facing what you've done." I asked if Mark was there. She said yes, but that he didn't want to speak. I told her he was running away from responsibility. She said, "He's just stopping yours from hurting him anymore." After she hung up, I threw my phone across the room. It hit the wall and clattered to the floor, screen cracked but still glowing faintly. I sat there staring at it until the light dimmed. The next morning, I decided to take control of the story. If people were going to talk about me, they could at least hear my version. I met Adele at a cafe. She looked nervous, which irritated me. I told her everyone was making a big deal out of nothing. She said quietly, "It wasn't nothing, Iris. You humiliated him." I said, "It was a joke." She said, "A joke about his body isn't just a joke." Her pitying expression made my stomach twist. I accused her of leaking the photo, told her she was pretending to care because she was guilty. She said she hadn't leaked it, but she wasn't going to defend me anymore either. Then she left, leaving her untouched coffee on the table. That night, I posted on social media a photo of me with a wine glass, captioned, "People can't take humor anymore." Everyone's so sensitive. It was petty, but I needed to feel in control again. For a few hours, it worked. Some friends commented with supportive emojis, others stayed silent, but by morning, the post had been shared. And not kindly. Someone screenshotted it and added, "Imagine mocking your husband online after what she did." The comments that followed were brutal. Strangers called me names I won't repeat. Someone tagged Mark's workplace. By noon, I deleted my account, but it was too late. That evening, Lydia came by. I didn't invite her, but she walked in like she owned the place. She said, "Mark doesn't want to humiliate you publicly. He just wants distance." I said, "Then why is everyone talking about me?" She said, "Because truth travels faster than shame." I laughed bitterly, told her she sounded like a fortune cookie. She just sighed and said, "You should find your own lawyer." Then she handed me a card, Rachel West. The next day, Rachel herself called. Her voice was calm and professional, but every word was like a warning. She said Mark's legal team wanted an amicable resolution, but that my online behavior was undermining the process. I said I hadn't done anything illegal. She said, "Not illegal, just irreversible." When I hung up, I went to Theo's room. His little shoes were lined up neatly by the wall. His drawing still hung on the fridge, one of us three smiling together. The normalcy of it made me dizzy. How had I managed to wreck something so ordinary, so stable? That night, I called Mark again. This time he answered. The sound of his voice startled me. I said, "We need to talk." He said, "There's nothing left to discuss." I said, "You're really doing this? Over a joke?" He said, "It wasn't a joke. It was humiliation." I said, "You've humiliated me now too." He paused for a long moment, then said, "The difference is, I'm doing it legally." Then he hung up. I sat in the dark for a long time after that, holding the phone to my ear, even though the line was dead. 2 days later, a new envelope arrived. Official again. This one was thicker, heavier. Notice of pending custody review. My heart stopped. Custody. That meant Theo. I called Lydia immediately. She said, "He doesn't want to take him from you. He just doesn't trust you to put him first." I shouted that she had no right to judge me as a mother. She said, "You judged him as a man, and now you're surprised he's protecting what's his." I slammed the phone down so hard my hand stung. That night I couldn't sleep. I went through old photos, vacations, birthdays, even the wedding album. His face in those pictures looked different now, not weak or dull like I used to think, but calm. Always calm. Like even back then, he knew something I didn't. Around midnight, I opened the group chat again. All my messages were still there. Every cruel joke, every emoji. Reading them now felt like watching someone else's crime scene. I typed, "I wish I could undo this." Then I deleted it before sending. Outside, rain started tapping against the window. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the letter, the court, the custody talk. I'd always been so sure I could talk my way out of anything. But Mark wasn't arguing anymore. He'd stopped playing my game entirely. And for the first time in years, I didn't know what move to make next. By the time the mediation papers came, I was barely sleeping. Every morning, I woke up to new rumors or messages. Co-workers avoiding me, relatives checking in, Adele sending one-word replies like sorry or wow. Mark hadn't spoken to me in days, and the silence had turned into something unbearable, something sharp. I used to think I wanted him to fight, to yell, to make a scene, but now I'd take anything over this cold, measured distance. When Rachel West called again, she said the mediation session was set for the following week. Her tone was clipped, polite. She explained that it was in everyone's best interest to cooperate. I said, "You talk like I've already lost." She said, "You can't lose what you've already given away." Then she hung up. The apartment was too big without him. Theo spent most nights at Lydia's now, and the empty space felt like punishment. I tried to distract myself, cleaning, cooking, pretending things were normal, but the sound of my own movements echoed like reminders. Even my reflection started to irritate me. I caught myself talking out loud to no one, rehearsing conversations I'd never get to have. One evening, Lydia texted, "Mark will be by tomorrow to collect the rest of his things. Don't make it difficult." That line infuriated me. Don't make it difficult. As if I was the problem. as if he wasn't the one dismantling everything we built. I texted back, "He can pick them up when I'm home. I deserve to speak to him." She replied only, "He doesn't owe you that anymore." The next day, I waited for him. I put on makeup, even a nice dress. I told myself I just wanted to look composed, not desperate. When he arrived, he didn't even knock, just used his key, calm as if it were still his home. He looked around briefly, said, "I'll be quick." I said, "You can't just walk in like this." He said, "Actually, I can. My name's still on the lease." He started collecting boxes. His books, tools, and clothes I'd packed away without thinking. I followed him from room to room, throwing words at him, trying to break through that composure. I said, "You really want to end a marriage over one stupid thing?" He said, "Over one pattern, yes." I said, "What pattern?" He said, "The one where you hurt people and call it humor." I told him he was being dramatic, that people were making it worse than it was. He said, "No one made it worse. You just finally got seen." Something in me snapped. I grabbed one of the boxes from him, slammed it down, said, "You think you're some saint because you're quiet? You're just passive-aggressive." He didn't answer. He just kept packing. That made me angrier. I said, "You know what? I bet you love this. Everyone pitying you, acting like I'm some monster. You love being the victim." He finally looked at me and said, "I stopped being the victim the day I stopped explaining myself." He finished packing, carried the boxes out one by one, and came back only once more, to leave a key on the table. Then he was gone again. The apartment door clicked softly, like punctuation. I sank onto the couch and stared at the key. The stillness was unbearable. I called Adele, hoping she'd tell me what to do. She didn't pick up. I left a message, voice shaking, saying, "He's really doing it. He's gone. Everyone's turning on me." Later that night, she finally texted back, "I told you to stop doubling down. You never listened." The next day, my mother called. She said she'd talked to Mark. My heart jumped. Maybe he was reaching out through her. But no, she said he'd only called to clarify custody details. She sounded tired, almost embarrassed. "He's calm, Iris. That's the scary part," she said. "I told her he was manipulating her, making me look unstable." She said softly, "He didn't have to make you look that way. You did that yourself." I hung up before I started crying. That evening, I poured wine and opened my laptop, thinking maybe I could still fix the public part of this. If I couldn't get Mark back, maybe I could at least get people to understand. I drafted a long post, something emotional, something about privacy and forgiveness. I wrote, "People make mistakes. I was a wife trying to be funny and ended up being judged by the world." I hovered over the post button for a long time. Then I hit publish. Within an hour, the comments started. Still no apology to him. Funny how remorse shows up when the consequences do. Did he see this before you posted? I deleted the post after 2 hours, but screenshots had already spread. The next morning, another envelope arrived. Formal again, thicker than before. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity won. It was from Rachel West's office. Amended petition, seeking shared custody with limitations, citing online defamation and public disclosure. I couldn't breathe. My mind spun. Online defamation. He was using my posts against me. He was documenting everything. I ran to my laptop to delete more, but there was already a message waiting in my inbox from him. "You don't have to perform remorse. The court will measure it for you." My hands shook as I slammed the lid shut. That night, I drove to Lydia's house without warning. She opened the door halfway, blocking my view inside. I said, "You can't just keep him from me." She said, "He's resting. Don't make a scene." I said, "I deserve a chance to talk." She said, "You had years to talk. You used them to laugh." I tried to push past her, but she stood firm. "You should leave," she said, her voice quiet but final. I asked if Theo was there. She said yes, but that he was asleep. I begged to see him for a minute. She shook her head. He's fine here. You're not. When I got back to the apartment, I ripped open every drawer, searching for anything that felt like him. An old shirt, a letter, something. All I found were empty spaces where things used to be. For the first time since he left, I realized this wasn't a temporary fight. This was methodical. Every message, every letter, every quiet step he'd taken, it was all leading here. He hadn't yelled, hadn't threatened. He was just documenting, building a wall of evidence one fact at a time while I kept giving him more material. I sat on the floor surrounded by my own wreckage. The phone, the empty wine glass, the silence. Somewhere inside, the smallest part of me finally admitted it. Mark wasn't being cruel. He was being careful. And that scared me more than anything else. The mediation day came faster than I was ready for. I'd spent the week pretending it wouldn't happen, telling my mother I was fine, telling Adele I had it under control, telling myself that Mark still loved me, somewhere under all that quiet. But when I walked into Rachel West's office and saw him already there, everything I'd been pretending collapsed. He was sitting across the room in that navy suit he always wore for interviews, the one I used to tease him about. He looked calm, freshly shaven, even composed. I'd expected anger or tension. Instead, he looked like a man who'd already made peace with losing something. Rachel greeted me politely. Her tone was professional, neutral, maybe even kind, which somehow made it worse. "We'll keep this brief," she said. "We're here to finalize arrangements and avoid further public harm." The phrase public harm stung like a slap. I sat down, clutching the papers my lawyer had given me that morning. He was new, a recommendation from Adele's cousin, and seemed more interested in the clock than my case. He whispered, "Just stay calm. We'll let them show their cards first." Rachel began with facts, financial records, communication logs, even a timeline of social media posts. She didn't raise her voice once. She simply slid each document forward and explained it. When she reached the section labeled Incident Origin, I felt my stomach twist. She read the words aloud. "Unsolicited photograph shared in a social group without consent, later disseminated publicly." Then she looked at me. "Do you deny this occurred?" I said quietly, "It wasn't meant to spread." Mark spoke then, his first words of the morning. "Everything spreads when the purpose is humiliation." His voice was calm, even gentle. I tried to defend myself, to say I hadn't meant for anyone else to see. Rachel interrupted softly. "Intent doesn't change outcome. We're addressing consequences, not motives." My lawyer cleared his throat, trying to sound useful. "My client has already experienced significant public embarrassment," he said. "She's suffered reputational damage." Rachel replied, "Which she caused." That silenced him. Mark turned to the mediator and said, "All I want is stability for our son. She can have what's fair, but I need to know Theo grows up seeing respect modeled, not mockery." The mediator nodded. It sounded rehearsed but not cold, as if he'd practiced it not to hurt me, but to make sure it was clear. I felt my throat tighten. I said, "You're really willing to destroy our family over this?" He said, "You destroyed the privacy that held it together." Rachel moved on, discussing property and custody. Each sentence chipped away at what was left of my self-control. Half the accounts would be frozen until the process ended. Theo would spend weekdays with me, weekends with Mark. All communication would go through a co-parenting app. I wanted to scream that it wasn't fair, that I wasn't the villain everyone was making me out to be. But the more I spoke, the smaller I sounded. I said, "People have done worse." Mark said, "That's the problem. You measure harm like it's competition." The mediator suggested a short break. I went to the restroom, locked the stall, and leaned against the wall, shaking. My reflection in the mirror looked tired and angry and small. I tried to rehearse something powerful to say when I went back in. Something that would make him see me again. Not as a case file, but as the woman he'd once loved. When I returned, they were already talking quietly. Rachel handed him another document to sign. I felt invisible. My lawyer whispered, "They're finalizing temporary custody. Just agree and we can renegotiate later." I snapped at him under my breath. "You said he'd cave." He shrugged. He came prepared. When the mediator asked if I had anything to add, I said yes. I told them Mark had always been distant, that he'd made me feel like a stranger in my own marriage. "You can't expect a woman to live without attention forever," I said. Rachel's pen paused mid-note. She said, "Attention and respect are not the same thing." Mark didn't look at me. He just said quietly, "You don't even understand what you did." The words hit harder than yelling would have, because I did understand, at least now. But I couldn't admit that. Not here, not with everyone watching. When it was time to sign, my hand shook so badly that the mediator slid the pen closer for me. I signed anyway. Mark signed after, calm and steady, without hesitation. Rachel gathered the documents into a neat stack and said, "Thank you both for maintaining civility." Civility. That word again. It sounded like a cage. As we stood to leave, I asked Rachel quietly, "Did he tell you everything?" She said, "He didn't need to. Your own words told enough." Outside, the air felt colder than it should have. I saw Mark in the parking lot, talking to Lydia. She handed him Theo's backpack. He smiled at their son, lifted him easily into the car, and fastened the seatbelt. It was such an ordinary movement, gentle, automatic, and it made my chest ache. When he closed the door, he finally looked up and saw me standing there. For a moment, our eyes met. I wanted to run to him, to say something, anything, that could undo what had already been sealed in ink. Instead, I just said, "Are you happy now?" He said, "No, just finished." Then he got in the car and drove away. I stood there until the lot was empty, the sound of tires fading into the distance. Back at the apartment, I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by silence again. The pen from mediation was still in my bag. I took it out and rolled it between my fingers, staring at the clean, sterile ink stain it had left on my thumb. My phone buzzed. A message from Adele. "How did it go?" I typed back, "He's gone for good." Then, before I could think, I added, "He didn't even get angry, just erased me like I never mattered." Adele sent one more text. That's what happens when someone finally means what they say. I stared at her words for a long time. Then I turned my phone face down on the table and whispered to the empty room, "He can't be finished. He can't." But even as I said it, I knew he already was. The court date came a month later. I tried to convince myself it was just a formality, that maybe he'd soften when he saw me in person. I picked a pale blue dress because it used to be his favorite, thinking it might remind him of something. Our old life, the woman he once loved. But when I arrived and saw him across the room, I knew before anyone spoke that I had already lost. He was standing near Rachel West, composed and still. Even his breathing looked deliberate. When our eyes met, he didn't glare or flinch. He just nodded once, as if greeting an acquaintance, not a wife. That small, polite gesture broke something in me. The judge went through the case quickly. Everything was in order. The photo, the group chat, the HR complaint, my social media posts. Rachel presented them like clockwork, each page another nail sealing the story I'd built against myself. I kept waiting for my lawyer to object, to challenge, to defend. He barely said a word. Every time I glanced at him, he was just scribbling notes, avoiding my eyes. When it was my turn to speak, the judge asked me why I did it, why I had shared that image in the first place. My mouth went dry. I said, "I didn't mean harm. It was meant to be private." She asked, "Private ridicule?" I said, "No, a joke." She said, "At someone else's expense." Her tone wasn't cruel, just factual. That made it worse. Mark remained silent while she read the rest. The decision was short and clear. Joint custody, with him as the primary household for now. Limited shared accounts. no spousal support. Communications restricted to parenting matters only. The words blurred together as she spoke them, but I caught everyone that mattered: restricted, primary, final. When the session ended, Rachel thanked the judge, gathered the papers, and turned to me. "You can pick up your copy at the front desk," she said. Her voice was courteous, almost kind. I hated her for it. Outside, in the hallway, Mark was talking to Lydia. She was holding Theo's jacket. They both looked calm, grounded, whole, like a family I had already been cut out of. I walked toward them, unsure what I meant to say. When I spoke, my voice came out smaller than I intended. "Can we at least talk alone?" Mark looked at me for a long moment before answering. "About what?" "About us," I said. "There is no us, Iris," he replied softly. "There's co-parenting, that's all." I wanted to scream that he couldn't just erase me, that I was still his wife. But before I could, he bent down, buttoned Theo's coat and said, "Say goodbye to Mum." Theo hugged me quickly, distracted, like he didn't know who to comfort. Then he reached for his father's hand, and they walked away. I stood there, frozen, while Lydia gave me a long, unreadable look. Not hateful, not pitying, just final. She turned to follow them, leaving me alone in the echoing corridor. I walked outside into the parking lot, the cold air hitting my face. My lawyer caught up, handed me an envelope and said, "You'll want to keep this copy for your records." His tone was empty, like someone giving directions to a stranger. I took it without looking and started walking toward my car. Inside, I sat for a long time before starting the engine. The envelope lay on the passenger seat, heavy with decisions I hadn't made. I thought about all the times I'd laughed at Mark's quietness, how I'd told Adele he didn't have it in him to stand up for himself. And now he'd done the one thing I never thought he could. He'd stood up without saying a word. When I got home, the apartment felt hollow. The table where we used to eat dinner together was bare. The picture frames were empty. I hadn't even noticed when he'd taken the photos. On the counter was my phone, face down. I picked it up, half expecting messages. Maybe from Adele, maybe from Mark. Nothing. Then I saw the wallpaper had changed. I didn't remember doing it. It was blank white now, no photo, no reminders. For a second, I wondered if Mark had reset it when he'd come to get his things. But that didn't make sense. The phone had never left my sight. Still, the emptiness of the screen unsettled me. I went to my email. There was one unread message, sent from an address I didn't recognize. Subject line, deleted properly. My stomach turned. I opened it. There was no text inside, just a single attached document, the final judgment, scanned and signed. That was his message. I sat down slowly, the silence pressing in on me. For the first time, I understood what he'd meant when he said he'd handle it properly. There would be no dramatic revenge, no public confrontation, no shouting, just quiet, lawful erasure. I turned off the phone and placed it face down again, exactly where it had been. The apartment was completely still, not peaceful, not safe, just empty. I whispered his name once, softly, like maybe he'd answer from somewhere. But the only reply was the refrigerator hum and the faint ticking of the clock, each second marking the distance between the person I'd been and the person I'd just become. When the clock struck 10, I stood, gathered the envelope, and placed it in the drawer where his wedding band used to be. The space fit it perfectly, like it had been waiting all along. That was the last thing I did before turning off the lights. The room went dark, and for the first time, I didn't try to fill the silence. It was his now, his victory, his closure. And I realized, too late, that I had finally taught him how to win an argument by never opening his mouth at all. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.